Okay. Thank you, but no. Close. A lot of you were kind of close. Some of you had basically that down. So let's review the game again. Who's got a couple coins for me to use as a prop? Still have your dimes? Who gave me that before? Was it? Got spent over the weekend? Alright, so we got a couple quarters. Rachel's got a couple quarters. So, let's have Dylan on the spot again. Everybody watch carefully. I want to think about the result here. So player 1, player 2. We each choose what we want. Okay, I'm ready. You ready? 1, 2, 3, go. Oh, they match. Both were heads. They match. And since I'm player 1, I win. Okay, now think carefully about the payoffs for each individual. Be more specific. What's the appropriate thing to put in the cell in the payoff matrix? What do we need to put in there? Think of the result here.
Is it 50 cents?
50 cents.
Are you assuming that you just keep the coins?
Yeah. This is the result.
That wasn't in the rules. You didn't tell us that.
Yeah.
What do you mean it's not in the rule?
You said
you just say they win.
Include that. Yeah,
you didn't say they win.
You didn't say they win.
You didn't say
You
when
said
they
they
win.
won or lost. You didn't say
Well,
what they
come
won.
on. Anything worth doing is worth doing for money, right?
That's the
You just didn't want.
Oh, the game was, we went through the game, I collected the coin, even when we had the dimes last time. So you win the other person's coin. So what's the proper thing to put in the payoff matrix?
50.
50 cents is wrong. 25 and? Negative 25. Now you got it. So, everything else Marshawn had here was correct. But these payoffs, we started with 25 cents. So even though we ended with 50, that's not what we won. Right? So when player 1 wins with a match, they win 25 cents. And player 2 loses 25 cents. And had they been tails, player 1 wins 25 cents, player 2 loses 25 cents. If they didn't match, player 1 loses 25 cents, player 1 wins 25 cents. And if they don't match the other way, same result. So there's our payoff matrix. Yes?
Wouldn't it be 10 and negative 10 since we're playing with dimes?
Yes, on the 10 it would have been, yes. Sorry, yeah, go ahead, you guys can put in 10, minus 10, plus 10 for 10 cents. Same thing, it'll work out the same here as we start to look at this thing further. We did start off with dimes. You know what? I'm going to change mine to dimes too. I think that's a good idea because I wanted to follow from the rules that we had. We had dimes. Did we write dimes in the other one too?
No,
then it doesn't, maybe it doesn't matter. But I'm going to go ahead and do that.
I have matching pennies as the title, then we used dimes and we finished up with quarters.
So yes, matching coins. Hopefully that won't screw you up too much. But yes. Alright, so that is the payoff matrix. And it doesn't matter which coins we use. So, what's the equilibrium? What's the, that's what we've been doing with this, right? We had Battle of the Sexes, we've got the advertising, we had the students that were cheaters. You know, where does this game go? Where does this game go? First step to trying to solve games that I recommend is to look for what? Dominant strategy. Does either player have a dominant strategy?
No.
No. What does it mean to have a dominant strategy?
You choose it every single time.
A choice that makes you better off no matter what the other person does. So if Dylan goes heads, I should do heads. If Dylan goes tails, I should do tails. So my answer changes depending on what she does, and then the same is true for her. So there's no dominant strategies. What else? How else can we start to try to solve this game?
Pick a square and see if you want to change it.
Pick a square and see if you want to change it. What are we checking for more formally?
Nash
A
equilibrium.
Nash equilibrium. So check for a Nash equilibrium. And so a Nash equilibrium is a strategy combination such that neither player wants to change their mind, taking as given what the other one has done. So if we start here, for instance, you can start anywhere. Would Russ want to change his mind?
No.
No, because 10 is greater than negative 10. Would Dylan like to change your mind?
Yes.
Yes, because 10 is greater than negative 10. So that's not a Nash equilibrium. So now we come here. Would Dylan like to change your mind?
No.
No, because 10 is greater than negative 10. Would Russ like to change his mind? Yes, because 10 is greater than negative 10. We want to switch. All right, would Dylan like to change your mind?
Yes.
Yes. Darn. Would Russ like to change his mind? Taking is given.
Yes.
Yes, because 10. So this kind of is the eyeball training part. You got to look at the right cell and think, are you going up, down, left, right? I'm going to give you a little tip now that we've gone through it a couple times that you might want to do. As you lay this out on paper, maybe you want to circle agent number 2 and then just circle all their payoffs. And then you always kind of remember, you don't have to do that, but sometimes that might kind of train your eyeball better on which one's which. So, how many Nash equilibrium are there?
None.
0. No Nash equilibrium. So there's no Nash equilibrium, no dominant strategy. So now we've seen all kinds of things with this setup here, this 2x2 matrix. We started you off with the prisoner's dilemma, which had 1 Nash equilibrium. Then we moved to Battle of the Sexes, that had 2 Nash equilibrium. Now we've got this game, and there's no Nash equilibrium. It turns out there's kind of a fancy mathematical equation that would let you know that there's 72 possible permutations of this little simple 2x2 matrix. 72 ways. So in other words, right now we've got this move in this direction. I could make this a positive, right? And now that those two are tied, so that'd be 1 permutation. So we've got a number of different ways to set it up. And what was the name of the movie that was made after John Nash? A Beautiful Mind. And so that's part of what's kind of beautiful about this, is that you've got this little simple thing that we could teach a 4th grader how to use, right? But it's very powerful in looking at strategic behavior and how to analyze games and how to analyze strategic behavior. So that's kind of the beautiful part of it, in my opinion. What's the equilibrium? What's the best way to play this game? Let's say we play this game for a while. Maybe it's a repeated game. I've got a strategy in mind that I'm going to play with Dylan. Okay, so I got a strategy in mind. You ready to roll again here? All right. Okay, ready? 1, 2, 3, go. They don't match. Dylan wins. Okay, 1, 2, 3, go. They match. I win. 1, 2, 3, go. They match. I win. Heads and heads. 1, 2, 3, go. They match. I win again. Yes. 1, 2, 3, go. They don't match. Dylan wins. 1, 2, 3, go. They don't match. Dylan wins. I had heads, she had tails. 1, 2, 3, go. They don't match. 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 How's my strategy doing?
Not very good.
Not very good, right? So that was my strategy, was to play heads. Was that a good strategy?
At the beginning,
In the beginning, it looked pretty good,
and then she got you.
and then she started crushing me. Right? So, what is the optimal way to play the game?
Based on what the other player's playing.
Random. Okay, so based on what the other player's playing, possibly. So she adjusted her behavior based on seeing what I was coming up with. So what if we play a random strategy of rolling a die, and if it's a 1, I play tails. If it's 2 through 6, I play heads. So that's a random strategy, right? So I'm going to literally take a die, roll it. If it's a 1, I'll play tails. If it's 2 through 6, I'll play heads. Is that a better random strategy to play?
Better than what? Just picking the same thing over and over again?
Yeah, is that the best strategy to play?
No.
I guess maybe better is not the best choice of words. Is that the best strategy to play? The best random strategy. What's wrong with that strategy?
Your odds aren't equal.
The odds aren't equal, but why? What's wrong with that? How is it going to cause me to lose money or lose playing the game over and over?
Still going to be doing heads pretty repeatedly.
Okay, good. So the fraction of heads that are going to show up randomly, bear in mind, is going to be 5/6 of the time, right? So the majority of the time I'm going to be playing heads. And again, if we started doing that, even if I'm rolling a die, Dylan starts to see that there's a lot of heads. There's once in a while a tail, but a lot of heads. And so she could adjust her behavior accordingly to take advantage of that. So what is the optimal random strategy to play? How's random? That's a new one for me. Did you say random?
There's no strategy.
Where you play heads just as often as you play tails.
Play heads just as often as you play tails. That ends up being the solution, the equilibrium strategy for this game, is to just take the coin and flip it. Because then there's no way that Dylan can take advantage of me playing a certain way. Like with rolling the die, then she'd be able to exploit that by seeing heads more often. But if there's an equal chance of getting a head or a tail each time, that turns out to be the optimal way to play the game. All right, so that is called a mixed strategy equilibrium. And for every game, there is a solution. There is an equilibrium for every game. So there's no Nash equilibrium, but there is what we call a mixed strategy. What's mixed about it is we're going to allow a randomization technique to choose how to play. So a mixed strategy equilibrium is use of randomization tool. Use of a randomization tool to make the optimal choice. So the solution for this game, due to the payoffs in this game, in matching pennies, that's the name of the game, the matching pennies game, the optimal way to play is 50-50, heads and tails. In other words, you can just flip the coin. Flip the coin, roll a die, and 1 through 3 go heads, and 4 through 6 go tails. That would work too. So you have some. You can go to your You probably got an app on your phone somewhere that you can do randomization tool, right? And you can select what thing, and it'll select a number randomly from 1 to 100. 1 to 50, play heads. 51 to 100, play tails. So choose some sort of randomization tool that keeps them guessing. Now, when you're playing the game, if you had to choose, you might just kind of try to arbitrarily take play each one 50-50, and that might work pretty well. Maybe your human bias will kind of lead you to doing one more than the other for some reason. But that is a mixed strategy equilibrium. And I'm going to spare you some of the math here to solve it out. But I said that it comes down to the payoffs. And this particular game is what we call a zero-sum game. So this is a zero-sum game. Anybody know what that means? A zero-sum game.
Does that mean if you I'm just throwing this out.
Yep, go ahead, throw it away.
If you play it indefinitely, then I guess then each player is gonna end up with.
You're kind of onto the right notion, but it's actually simpler than that.
Okay.
So yeah, each player wouldn't, if they're both optimally playing the strategy, then the expected value is that you don't win anything, right? That's kind of what I'm hearing you say, which is a little more sophisticated even than what I'm looking for. In general, with a zero-sum game, anybody else want to take a stab? That was a good comment, though.
Is it because every thing in the boxes equals 0?
Yeah, the sum of the payoffs equals 0. So what one person wins is what the other person loses. A zero-sum game. That's important, especially in economics, because a lot of people think that way about even trade, for instance. And, well, if that business is making a profit, that means they took it from somebody else. That's not true. It's possible to have exchange. What we learned in Chapter 2 is that Tom and Jen engaging in trade by specializing in what they're good at the end of the day, both can have more. We can actually make the pie bigger. We can each have more pie, right? So that's not a zero-sum game. It's possible to make the payoffs greater than what we could do individually through this sometimes uncoordinated cooperative behavior that we get from the invisible hand of the marketplace. Okay, but that's a zero-sum situation, and unfortunately, a lot of the world sees things as zero-sum, and that's why I think that causes a lot of grief sometimes in policy, sometimes in households, between families. They kind of have this view of the world that my wins are your losses, which is true when you go to the casino. That's how things work, but it's not true in real life in every circumstance. Okay. Let me write down that zero-sum game thing just so you have that. The sum of the payoffs is 0. One person's wins is another's loss. Or losses, if there's a plural. One person's wins is another's losses. All right. Last topic for this game theory stuff is looking at what's called the extensive form of the game. I think better known as the game tree. So this is the extensive form. Otherwise, we might just call it a game tree. And what it is it's a different way of representing the game. And it's especially useful if we start doing sequential games where I move first and then you move. So put that little bullet on here. Especially useful with sequential games. However, any game can be shown in this format, this game tree format. And so it looks like this. Player 1, we're going to do this, you can do it sideways or upside down, it's kind of flexible that way. We're going to put a big fat ball there called a node. It's a decision node. And from this node, player 1 chooses heads or tails. That choice brings us to another node. And this is the player 2 choice level. Player 2 then can go heads or tails. Heads or tails. And then that brings us down to the payoffs. If it's head-head, the 2 coins match, player 1 wins. So our solution was first entry's 10, second entry's negative 10. And same was true if both coins were tails, player 1 would win. 10, negative 10 is the payoffs, which are exactly what's up here in the strategic form, or the payoff matrix form. So sometimes we call this just the matrix form of the game, and this is the tree form. If the coins didn't match, then player 1 loses, player 1 wins, and same over here. All right, so all of these little guys here, these are called decision nodes. As you start to get into more advanced modeling with game theory, this is also nice when you're dealing with uncertainty. So we can even put Mother Nature in here, and so maybe there's an unknown event of whether there's a flood or no flood. If we're thinking about this year on what happens with a set of outcomes for the insurance company, let's say. So we have the probability of a flood, the probability of a no flood, how am I going to react? And you can start to give you a nice framework for decision making to say, well, this is how I'm going to behave if it floods, this is how I'm going to behave if it doesn't flood, here's the probabilities associated with that. Okay, so these are still the payoffs, just like before. And you can see that all of the data that's captured in the matrix is represented here. We've got the payoffs, we've got the players, we've got the choices. Just a different format. And now we kind of see if it is a sequential game, and I'm going first and I'm choosing heads, then we ended up seeing Dylan choose tails quite a bit more, right? So it gave us this solution value when it was a sequential game. If I would have actually showed her I had a head, obviously, then it would have been all the more obvious for her to go to tail. All right, questions or comments there? All right. Our last topic of the chapter is to kind of go back to the world of supply and demand for a moment, which you know can be kind of a problem sometimes, and I want to think about an organization or a group of people working together called a cartel. So, and cartels can be modeled using game theory. So, you guys have heard of drug cartels, right?
Right.
So, what's a cartel? What do you think a cartel is, just from what you know from the real world of how they use the word cartel?
It's almost like a monopoly.
Okay, good. Yeah, it's almost like a monopoly. So we've got, the reason why it's not a monopoly is because it's not one firm doing it, but a group of firms. So in the case of a drug cartel, it's probably a group of drug dealers that are acting together in order to supply drugs to particular areas or countries or whatever it is. So that's the concept of a cartel. So a cartel is a group of firms, and it's usually a small group of firms, right? So it's usually a small group of firms, which fits our oligopoly model, small number of firms. So a small group of firms that coordinate choices to act like a monopoly. All right, so one of the more famous cartels is OPEC. I think we mentioned OPEC before. Does anybody know what OPEC stands for? This might be worth an extra credit point. Without, of course, Googling on your phone. So that would lose your point and offset it. Awesome.
Organization of Petroleum Engineering.
No, close. You were good on the petroleum part. A lot of times we get hung up on oil. Anybody else take a stab? You're close. You weren't too far off. Organization of Petroleum Exporting Countries. Organization of Petroleum Exporting Countries. So here's how it works. I'm going to draw 3 graphs side by side with each other. And we've got, let's say, we got Kuwait over here, and we've got Saudi Arabia over here. And each one of them has some sort of marginal cost of getting the oil out of the ground. So let's say Kuwait looks like this, and maybe Saudi looks like this. But since each one is in a different geographic location, the cost of getting oil out of the ground differs. We have oil in the United States too. Well, why don't we compete on the oil market? Anybody know the answer to that?
We don't have very much.
It's not even as much of a problem as much, but it is true they have more than us. Turns out they have oil a lot closer to the surface than we do. And it's expensive to drill down. So it's like if you're over in Saudi Arabia on that part of the world, let's say there's a big, here's the United States over here. We have oil that's down here, but we got to drill down really far to get that oil. Up in Saudi Arabia in the Middle East, they just poke a little McDonald's straw on the ground and boom, oil's coming out, right? So it's real cheap for them to draw the oil out of the ground compared to what we have to do in other parts of the world. So that's part of what gives them an edge on competing, because half the battle is getting the oil out of the ground. That's where a lot of the cost comes from. All right, so Kuwait and Saudi each might face different costs associated with bringing that oil out of the ground. And the idea is that they're going to work together to try to be a monopolist over here. So there's the world demand for oil. And since especially oil is a homogeneous good, we'd have the marginal revenue curve twice as steep, downward sloping, and there really is just going to be one world price of oil. And so they look at the cost of pulling oil out of the ground, and so we've got the sum of their marginal cost curves. This is our little sum sign. Remember, they're acting like a monopoly. Normally, they'd just be doing their own thing and pricing accordingly. But they're going to act like a monopoly, which is going to tend to restrict the quantity of oil, right? Marginal revenue equals marginal cost. So there's the amount that they determine they're going to supply to the world market. So this is the quantity of oil. This is the kind of the whole world market of oil. And we've got the little guys over here, the little Q's. And because they're a monopolist, back to what you guys need to know for the test on Wednesday, they're going to charge the highest price people are willing and able to pay for that. So we go up to the demand curve for that information. And we hang a left, and that'll be the world price of oil. And then we get the monopoly profits. I'm not going to draw the average cost curve in here, but we get all the same results that we saw for monopoly. Restricted quantity, it's not allocatively efficient, it's not productively efficient. How do they then distribute this production? So how this really goes on is they get together, have a big meeting, because it's the world economy, not the US economy, where those types of meetings would be illegal. They're able to get together and fix the price, fix the quantities. It's really the quantities that they're fixing, and then they're just letting the world price of oil be what it's going to be. So as the demand curve shifts, looks like a good time for a golf club here. So as China starts to demand more oil, as they start to expand, right, this demand curve can be moving around and shifting and getting flatter. And since it's a homogeneous good, they're going to restrict the quantity and let it sell on the world market. But they kind of know they can adjust. Since they control the supply of oil for the world now, acting together, they can kind of cut back or ramp it up or whatever to get the price that they want and ultimately get the monopoly profits. So, to do this efficiently in kind of a fair way for the companies, if this ends up being 100 barrels of oil, let's say, just to keep numbers easy, how many is each country going to do? Well, it's going to be according to their marginal cost. And so that means Saudi's going to do 60 barrels of oil, again, just making up some numbers, and Kuwait's going to do 40. So the production of oil is allocated to each country according to its marginal cost. All right. The world price of oil stays up here nice and high. So this green line represents the world price of oil. All right. These types of agreements, cartel agreements, whether we're talking drug dealing or whether we're talking oil, tend to get cheated on. The participants tend to cheat on the agreement. Using this model, can you tell me why? Why are they tending to cheat on the agreement? So let's say that the world price of oil is $120 a barrel, and the marginal cost is 60 in each country, right? So the cost of an additional barrel in Kuwait is 60, the cost of an additional barrel in Saudi is 60. But the world price of oil is 20. Why do we see these agreements getting cheated on? What are the incentives in each country?
Maximize their own profit.
Maximize their own profit, right? So self-interest doesn't go away. That's kind of what we learned in that other video too, when we put maybe people in politics and political positions and bureaucrats. They don't all of a sudden become selfless and they're just there to help people. They might have some self-interest as well. And that's what we see here. The countries are still trying to do what's best for themselves. What's the incentive to do then? Increase or decrease production of oil?
Increase.
Increase it. Why?
So
Because
you
they're
can
making
sell
more
some
than-
for yourself.
You're making more than
It costs you.
it cost you. So if we look at Kuwait over here, what is the revenue generated by the 41st barrel? If they just squeeze one little tiny barrel, who's going to notice? I'm just a drop of water in the bucket type of thing. World market of oil. What if I just produce one more barrel of oil?
Look at
What is the revenue generated by that barrel?
60.
What's the revenue generated by that barrel?
120.
120, the price that they're selling it at, which by the way is the same result we got for perfect competition, right? They're basically a price taker at that point. And so the marginal revenue curve is essentially perceived to be the world price of oil. So the revenue generated by the 41st barrel is 120. The cost is something a little bit higher than 60 if there's the law of diminishing returns and the law of increasing cost. So it might cost you 62 bucks. Is that a good thing to do?
Yes.
Yeah, except for maybe getting in trouble with your partners. But now what about Saudi? They're the big group. What about just them squeezing out the 61st barrel? Is that a good thing for them to do? Yeah. So the bottom line in this cartel arrangement is that every firm, country, whatever, every agent that's a part of the agreement has incentive to cheat on the agreement. And that's what we find out goes on. So even in the OPEC countries, they tend to cheat. They tend to overproduce a little bit more than what they do because there's pretty strong incentive to do that because they're going to make a buck off each additional barrel. Okay. On the drug dealing thing, we could think about each dealer in a particular region. If the kingpin said to, hey, don't put out more than 100, right? Keep that inventory on a per day basis. I only want this much going out the door so that we can keep prices high for our stuff, right? Same concept. Each individual one that's maybe there with the consumer has incentive to cheat on that agreement a little bit. And those tend to fall apart. Okay, this model is also the same as Toyota making Toyotas in California and Kentucky. So this is also true for what we call the multi-product firm. Think about the car business. Toyota, of course, used to make them in Japan, and there was nothing in the United States. As globalization increased, they plunked a plant in, I think the first one was in California, and then they put one in Kentucky. And I'm not sure where else there's car-producing plants out there. And this is how they would allocate production out to the plants. So Toyota faces a downward sloping demand curve, determines that they need to offer the Toyota Prius at $32,000. Where should we make it, in Kentucky or in California? Well, let's put it wherever the costs are cheapest at the margin. Where should the next Prius be built, in California or in Kentucky? Well, where is it the cheapest? You know, conditions change. Maybe a labor union forms or something in Kentucky but not in California. Then it makes it advantageous to shift production to California. And so this marginal cost curve, depending on economic conditions, can move in each location. And this is precisely how Toyota would allocate production out to the firms or to their plants in different spots. So that's last note to put on this. Let's see, I got to put a few more notes. I want to coordinate what we did here. Let me pause for a second. I've been talking a lot. Any questions on this? Let me put a couple key points here. So each firm each firm slash country, in this case, has incentive to cheat on the cartel agreement, the contract. Each firm has incentive to cheat on the cartel agreement because the marginal revenue of an additional unit exceeds the marginal cost. We're essentially violating what we said needed to hold true for the profit maximizer. Now, in theory, their long-term profits would be better by sticking to the agreement, but because each one has incentive to cheat, and there are ultimately potentially some competitors at hand, they tend to do that. All right, so from the example here, marginal revenue was equal to $120, and marginal cost was equal to 60. Therefore, maximize profits by increasing quantity, which is cheating. Okay, so last thing I want to do here is just kind of fly by some meaty parts of the stuff that you need to know for the test, so that you got them all in one spot. As we went through the lecture notes, I tried to tell you, memorize this, you need to know this, that sorts of thing. So, if we start with the little bit that we had in chapter 10, remember it's just the first few pages, but we talked about economic profits. And economic profits equal to 0 implies the firm is still earning a normal profit. So we learned about normal profit versus economic profit, and one implies the other, so we can kind of put that both directions. We learned about profits being a signal, all that stuff, the entry-exit stuff. So profits as a signal. So this is kind of the chapter, a little bit of chapter 9 stuff. Chapter 10 stuff, or I'm sorry, 10 and 11. This was 10, this is 11. Then we had the formulas. So we had total cost is equal to total variable cost plus total fixed cost. We often found it useful to turn that into averages and learn that the average total cost is equal to the sum of average variable and average fixed cost. All this is in your notes, so I guess you guys decide if you want to scramble to put this down or however you want to digest this. The most important formula is not there, to the economist anyway, and that is marginal cost. It's the change in total cost divided by the change in quantity, which we then learned was also equal to taking the change in the variable cost, since those are the only costs that change. And then you've got the basic graphs of the averages and the fixed. So you should know those. You have something that looked like this. I did it so many times here. Big fat spot for the minimum point, J-shaped marginal cost curve. Something that looked like that. Chapter 12 was perfect competition. This is the basic model that you should have memorized. Home base you already hopefully have memorized from all the stuff we've done. We have some starting place in the market. The new information that we learned is how does that translate to the company? The representative firm is just a drop of water in the bucket and therefore faces a horizontal, perfectly elastic demand curve, and marginal revenue curve is equal to it at the market price. So price equals marginal revenue is kind of the key aspect. In the long run, entry and exit of firms causes the profits to be 0. And so our long run equilibrium is this picture. Chapter 13, Monopoly. Memorize, at a minimum, there's lots of stuff to learn in this. These are just kind of my minimum guiding things that I think you should have down. The demand curve's downward sloping because they're the only show in town. Marginal revenue is twice as steep and lies below it. Even the monopolist can't escape the law of diminishing marginal product. Maximizes profits as all firms do by producing the quantity where the revenue generated by the last unit is equal to the cost of the last unit. The difference now is they're going to get to charge the highest price people are willing and able to pay. And that ends up giving them a profit not only in the short run, but also in the long run because of barriers to entry. Chapter 14, Monopolistic competition. The graph is almost the same, except you want to draw a flat looking demand curve because the firm now faces a bunch of substitutes, potentially. The rest of it, though, looks exactly like the one we just got done doing. They're still going to produce the number of fast food hamburgers where the revenue generated by the last hamburger is equal to the cost of the last hamburger. They're going to charge the highest price they can, but they're not going to have a lot of power due to available substitutes. And in the long run, they're not going to make any economic profit. So the average total cost curve is kind of unique in that we had economic profit equal to 0 because we had free entry and exit. And that is about 4 chapters in 5 minutes. You got to spend more time on it to get ready for Wednesday, tomorrow and Wednesday. We'll see you then. You got John's information still on the board.
Are you sending out a review?
Yeah, I'll be sending out a review like last time, that's right.
Okay, I was
Yes, I saw that you sent something. What was it regarding? I haven't been able
It
to.
just said file not available, so I logged back in. So if the file not available.
What browser are you using?
I have Chrome and
Okay. So I think in general, Explorer's been the more reliable.
Okay.